Thank you, everyone. I need to start with an apology. I don't speak any Spanish at all. And if anyone is here from the United Kingdom, you probably don't think I speak English either. I speak Australian, and for those translating, I am so sorry that you have to work with my accent. Track notes from foreign trails. I call it that because we are on a journey. You have your own journey. It is different to every other country I help with these regimes. My strongest advice to any jurisdiction is do it your way. Make it work for your people. Make it solve your problems. Because although we use similar mechanisms, we are doing it sometimes for different reasons. But that doesn't mean you can't learn from other places, and certainly we have learned from others on our journey. I want to start just with a bit of background to give you in 4 sentences the way our consumer data right, which is our whole of economy open finance, how it works. Customer data must be shared. At the direction of the customer, recipients must be accredited, there must be clear customer consent, and the people who receive data might have to share it too. We have reciprocity built into our system. There are 2 key regulators, a data standards body, which does our digital identification standards too. There are privacy safeguards and a clear liability framework. What we have in Australia is a payment system for data. It's not just data coming off a payment system, it is a full payment system for data for our economy. And it started with a very broad scope of banking data, which basically was open finance. And it already includes energy data, so you can share your energy account with your bank and your banking data with your energy company, if you choose. Because there is incredible benefits from sharing different kinds of data with entities with different backgrounds. And this year, we'll add non-bank lending, and then we'll move on to other sectors of our economy. But I don't want to talk about Australia's system as much I want to talk about what lessons we've learned from Australia and some other countries too. Now, these are 2 very beautiful parts of Australia. The one on the left is the Gun Barrel Highway. It's in the middle of Australia, where the desert is just desert for days. The one on the right is the Overland Track in Tasmania, beautiful area of mountains where the paths curve. Many people would tell you that an open finance journey is more like the Gun Barrel Highway. Straight, you know where you're going to get there. It never is. It's nearly always like the Overland Track. You have to keep changing and taking different directions because things change. If you're really interested in being at the cutting edge, you will not be able to understand everything that is about to happen. So you will have to change. If you're a regulator, if you're a fintech, if you're a bank, if you represent consumers, if you're a lawyer, all of these things change. So our journey has been more like the Overland Track than the Gun Barrel Highway. And that is just fine, because we still got to a destination. Okay, different compass, different courses. I've picked out 4 countries that I've worked with over the last few years. And you can see we can have basically 4 different reasons for doing open finance. I want more competition. I want more innovation. I want more consumer protection, or I need more financial inclusion. And on the diagram there, you can see Australia chose the top 2. We eventually moved to the bottom two, but we started at the top. You can see New Zealand started on the right two. Canada had a very strong consumer protection focus. And you can see the journeys we've been on as a result. Now, in this diagram here, design means we're going through the process up to creation of a law. Develop means we've got a law and now we're trying to put in regulations. Operate means it's going. We are working, we are sharing data. Perform means it is doing the things for our society that we want it to do. It is achieving its objectives. So performance in this context does not mean this many API calls. It does not mean this many switches of bank accounts. It means our society is benefiting from this. Whatever the reasons why we are doing it, we are achieving that. In Australia, that does not mean that every Australian knows the phrase open finance or consumer data right. In fact, they never ever need to. They just need to know that their mobile phone has saved them money or made their life easier and safely. That's why we're not yet at performance. We've got lots of people using it, but we haven't yet changed the lives of Australians in the way that we want to. I'll come back to that because I think it's really important that when you go through this project, you have in mind what success is, and success may be a societal gain, not necessarily an engineering one or an economic one. But we did have the view when we started that Australians did not get the value of their data. It was a productive asset of every Australian, and they were not using it. So we had very high societal goals. Okay, now, whatever reason is chosen for doing this, there are still very similar functions involved. So at the top, you can see there's the description I use of open finance, which isn't based on any jurisdiction at all. And as simple as one as I can find, which is sharing customer banking data as the customer directs for use as the customer desires. I've crossed out banking data because in Australia and New Zealand, it goes further than banking. The important thing about that sentence is the customer is the subject, not the object. They are in control. It's about them. And that is something that is sometimes forgotten as you implement these regimes. For whom are you doing this? In nearly every country, you're doing this for the customer. And it's very easy to lose that when you're deep in the technology. 3 functions come out of that. Portability of data, autonomy of the customer, the control of the customer, and accountability of the recipient. And they fit into a nice little triangle. And you can see there the green line as our journey. Where were some of these bends? Where were the corners of the overland track? We started with knowing we had to give the customer rights to share data. We quickly jumped to, we've got to protect them. We've got to make sure our data protection laws were really strong. We've got to give them all this privacy protection. And we made a mistake. We made a mistake. And that's because if it was so tight that we drive accountability so high, nothing happened at all because it was too hard to use. Finally, we worked out we've actually got to make the data flow. It wasn't good enough to have a perfect system that wasn't used. That didn't help any Australians at all. And when you come to looking at this and the way that different systems work, when you come to comparing it and working out which lessons you choose to take in your country, there's a framework you can use because every system has really similar foundations. There's enforceable rules, there's standardized technology, and there's regulated participation. But every country, they work differently. So Australia's box is quite high on all of those. Singapore's box is a very voluntary system, quite good that way, quite low this way. That's fine, that suits their culture. The way you choose to put this together suits your laws, your country, your goals. But they are still very similar foundations. But they end up with different features. Different things come out. And quite often people use the features to describe the system rather than the foundations. So the features, which is what I want to speak about, is what is the scale of participation? How many people do you have in the system? How many businesses? Then how much data are you sharing? How much have you got in there? And then what can they do with that data? What is the functionality? Can you make payments? Can you open and close accounts? We've just changed Australia's law so that we will be able to make payments but also give other instructions. Again, that suits our economy. It may not suit yours. And this is where we have really learnt some things on these scale of participation, scope of data shared, and the depth of functionality. And so have some other countries too. If you're expanding the scope. So you can see in Australia, we started with banking, we moved to energy, we've done all the work for telecommunications, but we've deferred it. And then we're going to add non-bank lending. How did we get there? Well, one thing we found out is that we had to consider all of these things over here to get the decision right. It wasn't just, let's include a new sector. We had to say, is there a benefit for customers? Is there value in sharing this data? What was the cost for the data holders? Do we want to transform this part of our economy? And also, what is the policy of our current government? How does it work with that? And that's where we get a data set. And we have this process on the bottom, which sets out how we go through this, because we have to consult quite a bit to get this to work, and we have to make sure we don't disrupt the existing infrastructure where we're going to go. Payments is a good example. We have a very advanced payment system. We want our open finance to work with it, not against it. And we learned our biggest lesson here. And this is something which always gets forgotten, I think, is no open finance regime produces any benefits for consumers or customers just by the regulation alone. Laws do not provide this benefit. Businesses providing new things to customers provide the benefit, new or better things. So you have to have participation. And it's best if you have an ecosystem and not just a few entities participating. We got this wrong. You can see at the top is our original process. Bank, data recipient, consumer, accreditation of the entity, all fine. But it wasn't, because there are so many different business models you could have. So we had to change our system. New ways of accrediting. We had to allow sponsorships and representatives so fintechs could provide service to other fintechs inside our open finance system while still being accountable. We also had to add an ability to share data with accountants, lawyers, financial counsellors, people who help people. And this took quite some process, because the initial response we had was everyone must have the same business model, and that was wrong. We needed to put flexibility in the system so businesses could provide benefits to real people. And the important thing about this is, as you can see in the bottom diagram, there's a trade-off that we have learned, which is you can have everyone being really accountable or everyone participating. And that's nothing new, because the same diagram is used when you construct a payment system in relation to the risk and cost of a payment system. You just take the word payment out, put the word data in, and you can work out how you have that trade-off. I personally am really keen to see how you manage this balance, because it says a lot about your culture and a lot about the way that you have interaction between regulators and the private sector. What else have we learned? That's a busy slide, don't read all of it. The only reason I've put that up there is to show what we had to do when we had a data sharing system to move to a payment and account opening and closing system. We had to make sure it worked with everything we do, but we also had to make sure it worked with our licensing system and also the different risks that you have when you are dealing with giving instructions and not just sharing data. The top diagram shows that read access and write access are really the same sort of thing, but the risks that get created are different. The same people can participate, but they might need to have different licensing, because you can imagine if I am going to trust someone with my data, that is different to trusting them to open and closing my accounts and moving all my money, and my accounts will be my energy account, my bank account. Indeed, the Australian framework creates a digital power of attorney. So I can authorise someone to do nearly anything in time in a digital environment in the same way we can do in a physical environment. Lessons there too. One of the critical lessons we did learn, which I would encourage, and this one was my fault. I made this mistake in designing the Australian framework. I forgot how important it is to have a league table. How many competitive people step up when their performance is measured. And so the measurement has to be public. So this is now what's available to every Australian to see real time, how the system is operating, how its performance is operating. There's equally a system that allows you to see how many failures of both fintechs and banks, energy companies, significant failures have been reported. It's just all transparency. A lot of the failures have no regulatory consequences at all. But people do need to know, because if their information is not being shared in the way that they expect, they get worried, they get scared. Information contagion is far more dangerous than financial contagion, because you can never really know that someone really is dealing with your information properly. So we need transparency, and we need to have performance measurement, and we need it to be very obvious. And a critical lesson that we have learned, and also has been learned in other jurisdictions, is the lesson about keeping perspective. And there's at least two parts of this. This is a beach. You know that, you have these things too. This is a beach in Australia, and probably like Chile, beaches can be dangerous. Lots of sharks. Maybe that's unlike Chile. We have lots of sharks, and it's dangerous. And so we have these flags where it's safe to swim. And I was one of the people that used to do that. Why am I putting that up there? It's because this is a question of perspective. You can choose to put these flags as close together as you want in open finance. You can choose to say that this is the only safe place for Chileans to swim, because it's dangerous everywhere else. But there is a risk with that. One, it could be that people no longer go to the beach because it's no fun to swim in there. Or, if you're like Australia, and I'm not suggesting you are, but Australians don't like authority. And so when they see a little tiny beach, they go and surf somewhere else where it's really dangerous and there's no one looking after them. And that's the issue, one of the issues we had in regulation, because our regulators, quite naturally, wanted to keep it really narrow. But then no one was really going to the beach and everyone was screen scraping, which was something that our government was not that keen on. But how could you blame them? There was nowhere to swim. And so the way that you set this is a reflection of your risk tolerance and what you want to achieve. Now, the way it works really well is if the people watching the beach are not just the regulators, but the participants in the ecosystem too, because you really know what's going on. You're the front line. The way our system is developed is we don't even have to wait for the regulators if there's something that goes wrong. The participants are allowed to step in straight away to save the system. So you choose where you set those flags. We set them too narrow and we had to move them out. The other part of this perspective point is that open finance does not operate on its own in a digital economy. It is merely one lane of a digital economy highway. It's a very important lane. It's the information lane. There's also a payments lane, money. Money is just information, but it tends to run on a different path. And there's also, in many countries, an identification lane. Most customers want to drive on that highway and be able to change lanes as they choose. They don't want them to be separate roads. They need to work together. That's a big job. That requires an holistic assessment of your digital economy. In Australia, that required us to go out 5, 10, 15 years and say, where do we want to be? Where do we want Australians to be able to drive? But it is really important, we found it was really important for it to all work together. And lastly, there's another question of perspective, which is you are not on your own. You're not the only country with beaches. There's a bunch of us now trying to work out how to make it safe to swim in open finance. That doesn't mean that you need to copy anyone else, but there is a distinct advantage to being able to see where others have made their mistakes, for example. You should be able to make your own mistakes, but you don't have to make the ones that we've already made. We've made those. They kind of suck. You don't want to make those again. But this journey requires some kind of way for different countries to share information, because the system really works when businesses from Chile can offer services to businesses in Canada, for example, businesses in Australia, businesses in New Zealand. We have 26 million people. Canada has 36 million people. New Zealand has 6 million people. You add that to Chile's population, you have a very big market. It won't have to work perfectly because businesses are very smart. You're in this room. You can work out how to make things you build here work somewhere else, as long as there is some principles that are understood. They might be different here. Data is culture. This is your culture. But this perspective of building your system so that your businesses can jump into other countries and offer services to the customers in other countries, that's extremely powerful. Sounds really hard, but even you just listening to me is part of the journey, because my view is that actually we have already some common principles. We may have a very different financial system. I don't think we do. We might have different standards. That's fine too, because this is not just about technology. It's also about regulation and rules as well. This is about getting the systems to talk. So to finish, I'd just like to say I'm really keen to watch your journey. It will be different to mine. even with the other countries I work with. But, at some stage, soon or later, hopefully our paths will meet, and from that time on, I'm really looking forward to walking with you. Thank you very much for your time.